Hey everyone, welcome back to another Pushing Film review, and in this video I want to go over Ferrania P30. I finally got the chance to try this black and white low speed film, and there's been no stock in Australia for quite a while now, or at least none that I could find. And recently there was a shop called Decisive Moment that got some stock, so as soon as I saw that I jumped on. Then I went ahead and loaded it in my Leica M4 and shot it over the course of a few days on a little bit of a variety of subjects. So just go ahead and have a look at a few shots here just to give you an idea of the film. Alright, so you can immediately see that this is a contrasty film, as I expected and as you probably expected if you've seen any shots online of this film before. But in my video I'm going to give sort of a first impressions review based on the one roll that I have shot and just give my thoughts and analysis of that one roll. So the way I'm going to break this video down is I've left some timestamps in the description like I've done with a few other videos before, in case you want to skip ahead to just my quick final thoughts or quick summary at the end, and there's a bit of a breakdown of sections in the video if you want to jump ahead. And speaking of other videos on YouTube on this film, one of the most helpful ones I found was on a channel called The Naked Photographer. Now, in that video, he actually did a much more technical breakdown of the film, and in his test, he concluded the film had a speed closer to about 30 ISO, or 32. So I went ahead and exposed my roll as a 32 ISO film, also just to do something different. I'm sure most other people just shot it at box speed. And on top of that, it also exhibited orthochromatic properties, which wasn't ever really advertised by Ferrania, but it was clear based on his color chart that the film has a higher sensitivity to the blue spectrum and also a lower sensitivity to red spectrum type colors. So based on that, I kept that in mind as I was shooting this roll. All right, so as for development of the film, I developed it at home using Kodak HC110 in dilution E for 7.5 minutes. I'll leave that information in the description in case you want to check it back later, but I found that the film was fairly easy to develop. It dried quite flat, the film base was pretty thin, and no problems in that regard. I then digitized my roll using my Canon 5D Mark IV and macro lens with the film in the essential film holder, and then converted it in Negative Lab Pro here on Lightroom. And I found it's definitely worth dialing that contrast down a little bit, which is a great benefit of using something like a DSLR scanning setup in Negative Lab Pro. You have a bit more control in that aspect. And as you can see in some of these screen recordings, even after using a lower contrast setting on my scanning setup, there is still quite a fair bit of contrast in this film. So there's contrast for days, no need to really add any, I found, with any of the shots on my roll. All right guys, so the next thing I want to do is jump into Lightroom here, go through a few of my selected favorite shots from this roll, and just sort of give you my thoughts and a few other technical details I noticed as we go through some of these shots. So as you can see here, even just from this contact sheet type of survey view on Lightroom, there is a lot of contrast in these shots, and I've narrowed it down to a smaller selection just because a lot of repeats there. Okay, so with the first shot on the roll here, there is a bit of a light leak because it was the first shot on the roll. This happened either while I was loading it or unloading it to develop the film. You can already notice the orthochromatic properties of the film with this red sort of picnic blanket. Those colors have gone darker, whereas the cooler blue tones have gone much lighter, giving that really high contrast look, or contributing to it at least. And during the same occasion here, I've got a portrait of my nephew just sort of on the grass there, and you can already see that this film can work quite well for things like portraits with that really great tonality and smooth grain, high contrast, dramatic look, has a really classic look. And because this is a cinema film, I guess it lends itself to achieving this look if that's what you're after. And the next shot from the same day out in the park here is a portrait of Sarah from a little bit further back. And to me, this did remind me a bit of some of the examples I saw of this film online, and you can kind of see that orthochromatic property doesn't always work the best depending on the skin tone, but we'll move on to the next shot. So the next few batch of photos was taken while I was out and about on the street, and you can see some people here doing trick-or-treating. It was the day before Halloween, or maybe it was Halloween. But in the shot, you can probably see that it helps that I rated the film at 32. A lot of the examples I'd seen online, the film does always seem to lean really dark, and I rated this at 32 exposed for these midtones, and you can see you do get decent shadow detail. It's not great, but the highlights have still held up all right, and you can risk blowing out the highlights with this film quite easily, which is probably starting to happen over here. All right, so from the same day, I've got a portrait of my friend Matt, and this is in very high contrast lighting. So this goes as an example to sort of show you probably want to avoid high contrast light situations if you don't want this look, which isn't necessarily bad, but it may not be for everyone. And if you look at the screen recording of me scanning this frame, you can see that you can extract a little bit of extra detail from those shadows depending how you scan it. And especially in Negative Light Pro, I found that was quite helpful. All right, so if you look at the next shot here, just a close-up sort of photo of the Olympus pen that Matt was using, and just some more shots of Halloween decorations in the front of houses. And again, you can see that really high contrast look that you get when you shoot the film in a high contrast scene like this one. The next few shots here are from the same day, and they are of just sort of this ghost decoration in front of a house. And there was actually a lady in here, and I was sort of trying to bracket the shot and get a few different exposures. But the problem is the area where the sun was directly hitting this chimney is pretty much completely blown out, and detail is lost there while I was trying to expose to get more information on the lady inside the house. In this third shot, she just sort of looked at the camera, and I used the same settings. Yeah, you can see that this film does not really work too well with very high contrast situations, given the fact that there is extreme bright up here and extreme dark in this area inside the house. In this next shot here, I really like the way this one came out. This again with the 50mm shot, probably at f2, really 3D sort of look to it. And I don't know if the film contributes to any of that, because I know that the lens I was using does have that characteristic, but the tones on this are great. The way that this is rendering here with the pumpkin, quite sharp, low grain, great detail, and it just gives a really unique look. All right, next shot here of the mailbox. There's these really nice flowers growing out in front of it, but there's quite a lack of shadow detail here compared to what I remember seeing in real life. All right, another shot taken outside. Another one here. You can see if you expose for the highlights, your shadows will go completely black. Kind of a similar look to something like Japan Camera Hunter, probably even more dramatic than that. Here I've got sort of a detail shot of my guitar and just shooting really wide open to give this sort of smooth look. And it can work quite well, I suppose, for things like this if you're going for that dramatic classic look. But with the next shot here, I exposed a little bit brighter, and I really like the way this shot came out. And again, the lens contributes to a lot of the look of this particular photo, but the film also does a great job giving this moody, dramatic sort of look. Something like, I think Rolly retro films give a similar look. I haven't shot them, but based on what I've seen. Okay, so just a horizontal shot with the same setup. Quite like how this came out. It was just by window light, which I think works quite well for this film. And what these two shots demonstrate to me is that the film works a lot better in lower contrast situations, not shooting in direct sunlight, but something like window light is amazing for this film. And that's how I would try and shoot it moving forward. All right, so the next shots take us into another setting again, and this is where I started to use a bit more of the 35mm lens. This is a really hot, sunny day out in St. Kilda at the skate park here, and just sort of exploring around and just sort of trying to take street photography style photos, which can work quite well if your subject is as stationary as this guy. And continuing through here, you can see that was a really busy day on the beach, and I sort of stopped down a little bit here, tried to get a little bit more of a landscape style of photo to see how much highlight detail would hold up, and it holds up quite fine. You can see even in the hazy distance in the city there, the crazy crowds, and yeah, the sharpness is quite nice, which again, a lot of it is due to the lens, but the film does a pretty good job too. And this shot I quite like was of this signature roller skate van that you see around the beach here a lot, and I just sort of tried to get a different composition of it, and I think it worked quite well. And it really shows these really nice tones you get in the sky, which was a cloudy sky. Even though it was cloudy, it was quite bright, and it worked well to give a lower contrast look that lended itself well to this film, because the film naturally adds a lot of contrast. With street photography, if your subjects are moving, this is a very difficult film to work with, especially when I'm used to shooting something like HP5 between 400 and 1600. Shooting this film at 32 with moving subjects was really not ideal, as you can see with that shot there. But when things are stationary and when you're stationary, it can work quite well for shots like this one. All right, so the last two shots on the roll, a couple of street photography style photos that did work. And because it was so bright, I was able to stop down a little bit. This is probably at about f5.6 or f8 at 125th or 250th of a second, if I'm judging correctly. And yeah, I quite like how this came out. Again, that really classic old school cinematic look with these two shots here. And this was the end of the roll. So after this, I finished the roll, rewound it, and shot some color because the day was really good for it. But it was a cool way to finish this roll of Ferrania P30. And I hope that looking at some of these shots gives you a good idea of what you would expect from this film in all the various situations that you would probably try and shoot it. Portraits, landscapes, street photography, things like that. So my quick summary of the film would be that it is a very high contrast film. It does seem to lean dark, so I would advise, based on what I've seen and tried, to maybe overexpose the film a little bit, shoot it between 32, 40, maybe even 64. It definitely seems to exhibit orthochromatic properties, so keep that in mind if you're shooting skin tones, warm tones, reds especially. They are going to render a little bit darker. The film is not as sensitive to those reds, and it will make your blues go quite bright, which can be an issue, for example, with blue skies, or maybe if you're wearing a blue shirt with your subject. So just keep that in mind, that the film seems to have that orthochromatic look to it. In terms of developing the film, I found that pretty easy. There's quite a range of developers that Ferrania advises you on the ability to use, what works well, what their first preference is, some of their second preference developers. Things like Xtol, D76 and HD110 are amongst the more popular developers to use with this film, and I used Kodak HD110 at dilution E for 7.5 minutes. And the film also dries quite flat, and that makes it really easy to file away. In terms of scanning the film, it can be quite difficult to scan. You do need to tame some of that contrast in your scanning process, whether you're using a flatbed scanner, DSLR scanning, and the other difficult thing might be if you're sending it to a lab, you might need to let them know and see if maybe they have the ability to tame some of that contrast, unless you just want it to come out as it comes out with the lab scans. But just something to keep in mind there, that it can be a little bit tricky to scan. And overall, I think this film looks great. It's a really unique film. It has nice tonality. It's something that you might shoot for special occasions or shoots where you kind of know what you're working with. Definitely keep some of those properties in mind that I mentioned earlier. And as I said, maybe avoid high contrast scenes if you want some shadow detail, because if you shoot in really high contrast scenes, you'll probably get just mostly black and white with not many gray tones in between. All right, so reaching the end of the review here, I definitely would advise trying Ferrania P30 if you haven't before. I really enjoyed shooting this roll and some of the results that I got. It is a little bit hard to find stock. That is the thing with this film, especially with some of the things happening this year. I'm not sure if production is up to their usual standard, which they were already struggling with. But I got my roll through Decisive Moment, and I'd like to thank them for providing this roll for review, because they were kind enough to discount an order of film I made by the cost of this roll. So I'd like to thank Decisive Moment. I'm not sure if they have any stock left, but definitely check them out. They're a great place to buy film if you're based here in Australia. Also, I'll be putting up more of a written review or article on this film on Ferrania P30 on my personal blog, which I'll link in the description below. I've been trying to write a little bit more, and that might be a good way for you to check out some of these shots in higher resolution, in case it was a little bit tricky to see them on the screen here. So overall, I really like this film. Would I shoot it again? I think I would, although my favorite low-speed black and white film is definitely still Ilford Pan F50. I feel like I prefer Pan F because I can achieve some of this sort of look just using filters and have some of that versatility to play with contrast and a bit more leeway there. Also, I know this film has a really high silver content, leading to these really nice rich tones you get with it, but I would also probably prefer shooting something like 8-ox Silver Max because of the 100 speed, a little bit more versatile, a little bit more workable, and that film also exhibits a really nice, unique look. However, if I had something in mind where I wanted this specific look of Ferrania P30, I would definitely shoot it again. I would try a few different options in terms of exposing and maybe even some darkroom prints, hopefully in the future. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed my first impressions review of Ferrania P30. Thanks for watching another Pushing Film review, and I'll see you in the next video.